I am so excited to be here to moderate our next conversation and to introduce our two speakers. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story and my connection to the topic, bringing the work home. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from Hong Kong, and as a child, this was about the extent of my exposure to nature. That's me in the pink with the suspenders with my sister and cousins in front of Ocean Park. It's like our SeaWorld. As a kid, I loved nature, but it was exclusively something that I learned about through stories, not something I thought I had access to. So when I decided to follow my dream of photographing and studying animals in the wild, I went somewhere I thought was as far away and as remote as possible, the Central African Republic, working as a research assistant with Western lowland gorillas. Near where I worked, there was this incredible natural clearing in the woods called Zangabai. And here you could see 100 to 200 forest elephants gathered at once. To this day, it's the most incredible natural sight that I've ever witnessed. I took this photo the day before I was evacuated from the CAR because of the civil war that sadly still continues. About 6 weeks after we left, poachers came to the clearing and gunned down 26 elephants. For their ivory, of course, ivory that could have very well ended up in Hong Kong, because we have the largest ivory market in the world. I was back home when I heard this news, and it was the first time that I felt on a visceral level that my corner of the world, my home, was having such a devastating impact on wildlife somewhere I thought was so far away. And that's when I realized that I could have a bigger impact on African wildlife conservation by going back home and telling stories there and changing the way people see nature. I don't want kids to grow up the way that I did, not being aware of the amazing biodiversity we have in Hong Kong. And yes, we have amazing wildlife in Hong Kong, but I'll save that for another talk, or you'll just have to come visit me. So with the grant from National Geographic Society, I started a small project called the Hong Kong Explorers Initiative, which encourages people to explore and appreciate Hong Kong's wild side using talks and photography and mini expeditions. The hope is that by connecting people, especially kids, with nature, they'll eventually want to protect it. But it's not enough. We can't wait for the next generation to take over, because elephants are still being killed every 15 minutes. China tried to legalize the rhino horn and tiger bone trade a few months ago before quickly backing down. Because stores like this still exist, it's chock full of shark fin and manta ray gills and other wildlife products. I've spent the past few years covering all sorts of issues around Asia, but the wildlife trade issue is personal. And being Chinese, I feel some degree of responsibility to cover it, and that's why I've decided to turn the lens back home. I took this photo just quickly on my phone while working on a documentary led by another grantee, Liz Unger, about the budding jaguar trade fueled by Chinese demand. Just how urgent this problem is and just how difficult it is to address it is made all too clear by my own parents, who know what I do, who I recently found out still consume shark's fin when I'm not around, and still have ivory at home. I found out my dad had consumed rhino horn a few decades ago, and that I myself had actually been fed ivory as a child when I was sick. Another photography and film project I have in the pipeline is to go back to the Central African Republic, where, as I learned firsthand, is affected by Chinese demand for wildlife. But this time, I want to focus on people, specifically the Bayaka Pygmy people, who have this incredible relationship with the forest, and it's thanks to their skills that conservation projects in the region are able to work at all. The plan is to bring these stories back to Asia, and the hope is that if I, as a storyteller, can get people back home to see what I saw and experience what I did, then that might change the way they see their own relationship with nature and their impact on it. Thank you. So that's my story, and I'm really excited for you to hear the next two stories. So please welcome National Geographic Society grantee, Andrea Bruce.
need this. So first I'm going to thank National Geographic Society for having me here today. It's really a pleasure, and it's humbling to be in front of all of you, so thanks. So the first person to ask me what the word democracy means was a prostitute in Iraq. It was 2004 in Baghdad, and her name was Hala. Hala styled herself from posters of Britney Spears, and her husband had died in the initial invasion in Iraq in 2003. My answer to her question was lame. I said something about the Bill of Rights, and ever since then, the question has haunted me. I'm going to take you on a quick journey to show you how this question brought me here to this point in my professional and personal life. Since 2003, I've mostly covered war, revolution, and conflict overseas. I've lived in Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, and Mexico. Here, a Marine threatens a man robbing a bank in Baghdad. And throughout these travels, people have continued to ask me what I, as an American, think the word democracy means. Here, I lived with a family in Gaza and watched with them on their roof as Israeli bombs fell not too far away. And here, women line up to vote for the first time. In Syria, the heartbreak that exists no matter which side of a war one finds themselves on. The chaos I covered made me curious. What do people in my own country think democracy means? A country that often exports this idea, and a place where some people are willing to die for it. And so I've begun documenting our society's connection to this widely used, often misunderstood concept to find a better answer than the one I came up with years ago with Hala. The first thing people mention when they talk about democracy are elections. And what does this mean in a country where the majority of Americans don't vote? I traveled to areas of the United States with the highest number of non-voters, like El Paso, Texas, on the border where people feel their vote is useless, drowned out by their conservative state, Texas. And Warner Robins, Georgia, a highly religious Air Force town. Areas of Appalachia where people feel forgotten. I found that asking this question requires a deep understanding of the people in the photos. This project attempts to bridge today's deep political divide, to understand that people don't exist along party lines. For example, here in Trump country, most people consider themselves liberal. In North Carolina, I followed NRA supporting hunters, conservatives, but not in every vein. They are traditional environmentalists, close to nature. They believe in climate change. And in Memphis, this couple belongs to a notorious gang. The gang has a leader who enforces school attendance, good grades, and helps families in need. In a city known for inequality and racism, it raises interesting questions about what happens, who steps in, when the system fails those living in our democracy. And my images aren't the only part of the project. This is where I've left traditional journalism to find new ways of learning from and engaging the communities that I cover. Armed with their cell phones, the communities themselves take photos and participate in discussions about what they think democracy looks like, whether it exists in their everyday lives, connecting one community to the next in an Instagram feed called Our Democracy. The final leg of this project is personal. Many of us photographers have dedicated our lives to photography, trying to get people to pay attention to the world around us. We often forget about our own lives. Even now, I'm shy to stand up here and share something very important and something many female photographers keep secret. The process of coming home, rediscovering my country, has also given me the opportunity to concentrate on creating my own family. 3 months ago, I gave birth to a baby girl named Willa. And so moving forward, I will travel the United States with my mom and my daughter, 3 generations, as I seek a deeper understanding of the United States on a local scale, see how people participate in democracy and whether it works. I'm trying to understand the state of my country and how it will affect my daughter's future directly. I'm making the United States my home again and bringing the idea of home to my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Andrea. Now please welcome Tomas Ayuso, National Geographic Society Portfolio Review winner.
Hello. I am from Honduras, even though I was born in Guatemala, and I'll get to that in a little bit further down the line. And as we're gathered here today, last night some 100, nearing 1,000 Hondurans left the country, crossing borders again into the unknown, many of whom want to go back to a land they were deported from. And this, you might recall, this was the case last year, but this happened again because that's how bad the situation is in their home. And in this talk, or this my little piece that I have here, I'd like to explain this changing of how home is changing, the concept of home is changing in Honduras. So in this picture I have here, is that some of you might have seen, is that a precise moment in which these 2 lads, seeing their home in San Pedro Sula, after seeing all the horrors that took place in these streets, recognized that it was either die for a cause of a war they never asked for, to fight for people they didn't care about, and choosing instead the right to live. And in Honduras, you have all sorts of armed actors that come in, come out, and appear and take lives with impunity, without accountability, and lives that just end with no real purpose other than a quota set by the different leaders of these groups, such as this moment in which the crash and noise of an advancing military police advance towards a peaceful demonstration, and they maraud through the neighborhoods in which Jason and Moises, who were in the previous picture, live, and they have to deal and endure that. Or the other side, that you have child soldiers that, for the same reasons of the different economic dispossession, disenfranchisement, and lack of real future, that they become consumed by these groups and this lifestyle. And as they journey forward and they migrate and they travel, home is replaced, not life instead is replaced by survival. There is no home. And in the project that I work on, which is called The Right to Grow Old, I submit that this life has been, this inalienable right is gone. It has been abolished. And before you can find a home, you must guarantee your survival. And in the case of, and this is a case of these boys who found a home and the process of migrating. These boys from the northern Caribbean coast, in the journey through Mexico, they met each other and said, "Hey, I like you, you like me. We seem to be working well with each other. Why don't we pool our resources and live together?" This is the story of Theo, who is the lad in the middle. And sometimes home can be the loving embrace of your partner, as is the case here of Alex and Adriana, who are in Tijuana. They were on their way to a gynecologist well, it was the first time they'd been to the doctor, to be able to see how their family unit was growing, even though they had nothing. The embrace, as I quote Adriana, was the home that she didn't have in Honduras. And sometimes home can just be the skin that you're in, as was the case of Josefina, who fled sexual slavery that she was bound to by the very people that brought her into this earth. And going back to me, I'm from Tegucigalpa, and this picture was taken from my actual home, looking at my home. And in Tegucigalpa, my family history, the short story of it, is that my grandmother, just to keep it simple, it was Palestinian, and so was my grandfather from Bethlehem. And her mother was Armenian, and she escaped the violence that consumed Armenia for the relative tranquility of Palestine. And then once the old world decided to go up in flames, she and her family crossed the ocean, went to Ellis Island, passed through New York City, lived in Park Slope for a bit, and didn't like it, and they moved south. They went to New Orleans. And at the port of New Orleans, they tried to make a living. They didn't much care for the life that they found there, but they heard from the banana boats and people at the port that there was this country, this Honduras, where there was bountiful work, that there was plenty, of which they hadn't had since they left Palestine. And off they went in that boat, bounced around the Caribbean, made it to Honduras, lived a little bit on the coast of Honduras, and made it down to Tegucigalpa, where I am from, in which my grandmother eventually went from being strictly Palestinian and integrated into the society and created this new identity, of which I am the inheritor of. This is her, and she was very much one of the prime movers in me becoming a storyteller through her oral tradition and always supporting me. Her name, in fact, being a summary of her displacement. Anita, a Spanish corruption of Hannah. Hasbun, a storied last name family name in Bethlehem. Bahayan, a name from old Yerevan. So, in seeing the stories that I heard, that I was a migrant family myself. I was a migrant myself in Honduras. That home was really several homes. That our family straddled the border. In this case, straddled the ocean. And that even though I had never seen Palestine, and to this day I haven't, there was this phantom pain of a loss of not knowing that, not seeing that. But the tradition was still felt because of my grandmother's way of conveying that information to me and eventually making who I am. But it is in this loss and this pain, to bring it back to Honduras and the displacement that Hondurans are having right now, I've known that it's the same way that my grandmother spoke of her displacement. It's in Tijuana that in the faces of these young boys, girls, families, men and women, that they were coming to grips in this transformation, that they left home. And even if the last sensation they felt as they left and crossed borders was the flames licking their backs of a country fully in collapse, they cannot let go that that's who they are. Home was Honduras, even if home was being consumed by madness. So much so, and if I may borrow a phrase by my friend Daniela Zalkman, which she should be out there, I do hope, they carry with them the signs of their identity. So in this case, as much pain as they endured, they will not be able to wash that stain, that mark, that ink is already dry. Here this man wears catracho, which means in our own slang is the demonym with which we call ourselves Honduran. And in this situation, I've come to realize that the process of of moving forward, of displacement, identity is an important factor in finding a new home, in finding a home after you leave. Much like my family found themselves in this Palestinian-Honduran syncretism, Hondurans, once they find the safety of a place they can call home, they'll be able to become Honduran so-and-so, even if it means in the cities of the Northeast United States, somewhere in the two-story building neighborhoods of Los Angeles, or in the middle of Mexico. I believe that in the process of crossing borders, and the process of journey, the process of displacement, it is a transformative event, that with each border that they cross, these people, and as I think this can be said of migrants at large, is that transformation comes with each border that they cross. They're conscious and willing participants of creating this new identity. And when that new identity is formed, they're able to find home. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomas. I now like to welcome back Andrea Bruce. Thank you both for joining me. Those were very beautiful and impactful presentations. Andrea, you told me earlier that you're a very private person, and you chose today to share your personal story. So why did you decide to do that, and how do you feel?
Well, I mean, when I realized that, well, it's scary to combine motherhood with photography. It's something that is so immersive in our lives, and I think a lot of us women who want to take the plunge in and have a child are worried that we won't be hired, or that jobs will be less, that people will think that we're no longer a photographer. And so I realized that the younger generation of women were just as scared as I was in that, and I don't want them to be. So I wanted to come out and just do it publicly. Not many people do.
That's great, thank you. Tomas, you've said that impermanence is a theme of your life, and your work is about people who are displaced and whose homes have been changed. So how does your experience in history inform your work, and how does that enable you to tell the story differently?
Well, I think more so than I think, it's something that I've noticed is that when I speak specifically with displaced people or people who have been forced from their homes, that even though that I personally was not, I grew up in an environment that was our family origin story. So it was I was able to quickly create an empathy and connection with these people, who the subjects of these stories that I cover. And I think that also informs why I seek these stories, because in some sense I get it as much as one can through the conversations and through spending time with them outside of just with a camera or anything like that. I felt that it comes natural, I suppose, and that's what has made it such a strong theme of my work.
Do you think being a new mother has changed the way you approach your work?
Oh, well, the way I approach my work, for sure. It takes a lot more planning and organization and a lot of things that I have to travel with now that I didn't usually have before. But it does change your perspective some. I don't think I'm at a point, it's only been 3 months, so I don't think I'm thinking clearly enough to be able to adequately state how, or to really see the whole picture. But yeah, I'm sure it has.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about very personal topics today, and I want to take a different interpretation of bringing the work home. You both work with difficult topics, so how do you maintain that separation and stop yourself from taking too much home, if you're able to?
This is something that I think is a constant struggle for me. Specifically working with Honduran subjects. I think for some reason when it's in another country or there is that distance that just you can opt into or it just happens. But when it comes to Honduran stories, be it in the country or in on this migrant route that I've been working with a lot, there the lines get blurred as far as to that distance. It's something that I'm working on constantly, and I rely heavily on friends who are in this crowd who were looking after me and making sure that I take the appropriate breaks and take that step back when it's necessary. And so I suppose it is by the kindness of friends who are there when you need them. That would be my way of doing it.
And your work is about taking your perspective back home, right? And so how have you found that different from working abroad? How's that working out for you?
Well, I think one important thing that I've found is that when I'm working abroad, I'm very aware of the cliches that exist in other cultures that we can easily fall into as foreigners. So I heavily rely on like translators and fixers and drivers and people, and I'm asking questions constantly about, so is this really what's happening here, or is this really what, is this how, if I approach this way, am I telling the true story? But now coming home, it's interesting that we don't really check ourselves as much. I found journalists, including myself, not really asking those questions about cliches, and so I've again had to step back, and that's one of the reasons why I've had so much community involvement in the project, is because I don't want, sometimes I feel just as much of I'm just as much of a foreigner in West Virginia as I am in Iraq, so am I doing this the right way? And that is the community aspect of the project.
Yeah. Going back to my last question, so how do you stop yourself from bringing the work home? And is it even harder when you're working at home in your own country?
I think, well, it's two totally different things for me, because covering war and conflict is pretty extreme, or situations that you've probably been in. The situations I've been covering at home are a little bit more low-key, mm-hmm. So it's more about just immersing myself in a community and trying to get them to trust me, because one thing that I've noticed, I feel like, even more so than 15 years ago when I worked in the United States much more, and much more than most of the countries I go to, journalists seem to be trusted much less, in my perspective, from community to community. So also having that involvement with the communities where I give presentations and I encourage discussions, I think it also introduces them to what a journalist is. And a lot of people I talk to around the country have never even met a journalist. So it shows the kind of sad state of the media when they're not reaching, especially some of the smaller communities that I've been to.
Mm-hmm. What surprised you the most with your latest project?
I don't know if it's a surprise, but a realization that that everyone's definition of democracy is different. And I'm not here to sway them into a different definition. I'm here just to ask the question and see what people think, because I feel like if everyone has a very different definition of this word, then how will people know how to fight for it if it starts to disappear? And so that's been kind of shocking to me as I go along.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Tomas? What's the most surprising thing you've seen in your latest projects?
The last major thing I did was follow the caravan, the Honduran caravan as it landed in Tijuana. And I was surprised at how being Honduran, although people don't at first glance notice that I'm Honduran due to my historical background, which I just discussed at length. But people don't see me as Honduran. They say, oh, American. So they feel, certain people feel like they can say whatever they want or how they really feel. And it surprised me being an observer at racism or xenophobia directed at ostensibly what I am, without them knowing they're speaking to someone. So that surprised me, how much the role of journalist changes the perception and what you receive as such. Mm-hmm. And that's something that kind of tripped me up a little bit, and it's something that ultimately, even if it was just like a plain conversation, I would bring it up and say, actually, I'm Honduran. And you can see people backpedal and say, like, oh, I didn't actually mean it that specific way. They're all good, some of my best friends are Honduran. Kind of like that. But that shocked me because it's not anything that I've ever seen before. But I've been thinking about it since then, so I would say that, yeah.
It looks like you've both experienced unexpected pushback from your subjects. How do you deal with that in the field, in the moment?
Do you want to start?
Sure. For me, I listen more than I talk. And I think that's probably something most of us photographers are pretty good at. But it's the same that you would do in almost any situation is when people don't trust the media or trust journalists, I just sit back and listen and ask a few questions and hang out. And then eventually people tend to relax when they realize, oh, so this is what a journalist is. And we're not some like monster. So, yeah.
I would agree. Sometimes when you speak to people who are, body language is really everything, especially for visual folk like ourselves, that you can just see, you feel the pushback coming immediately. And I think I would agree with Andrea. It's a matter of talking, speaking, being empathetic, and just waiting for your moment to share your side. That is, I'm not this monstrosity, this chimera that is here to eat your children. I just want to talk, hear your side, and really just portray you as you are. There is no need to add more than that. So I think the way to deal with the pushback is to put away the camera and talk for as long as you can. And eventually, I think this is a human universality, that if you're genuine and you're honest and your heart is open, people respond to that, no matter what the conditions are.
Today we've talked a lot about stories and how they can have an impact and bring us hope. In your recent reporting, what's given you hope? Andrea? Or Tomas, you can start.
I guess okay.
You were just on that thread.
Okay. I was surprised, again, I'll stick to the caravan. I was surprised that, unfortunately, the internet is the greatest thing and absolutely the worst thing that mankind has produced. And you can see obviously, going into the comment section of anything is an exercise in self-sabotaging your mental health, as we all know. And but when people would engage me, a lot of them were, with certain vile towards Hondurans and all that. But if you engage a lot of these people from a certain particular side of the political spectrum and speak to them and regard their points and treat them in a non-combative stance, I've been surprised at how many people can be persuaded to, not even persuaded, just look at this. It's a picture. It's not going to lie to you. Just look. This is how it is. How many people have privately written to me and through email or DMs saying hey, I never noticed it that way, the way that you described the story, you know, there aren't invaders, there aren't this and that, they're just people that if I was in that situation, I would most likely do the same. So that surprised me, and it was very heartening. And it's one of those things that when it gets to the most bottom level that you consider, what's the point in doing all this? You see these people that your work can have an impact, and people can generate methods to help people, even though that a month ago they were completely under the perspective that the world was coming to the end by these 5,000 refugees walking towards the border. And so there is hope. It's all a matter of doing the work, not only journalistically, but as a human engaging with another human. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of along those same lines. When I go to places, or when I've started to cover the United States again, it was, you know, I expected there to be this huge division that everyone talks about, like a Trump supporter looks like this and believes all of these things, and like liberals look like this and believe all of these things. And the reality, as I said, is that there are still counter narratives to that. There are places where people's interests intersect, and I think that is where the hope lies. There are things that people still mutually find important, and that's what I try to touch on.
Well, on that note, that's all the time we have. Thank you both for presenting your work. It was really beautiful. Thank you.